Hey everyone, this is Nick LaRue. This is Film Snobbery Live, or what passes for it these days. And we're here with our very special guest, director Dan Mirvish, director of the new hit movie that's playing everywhere, on the land, sea, sky, everywhere, Mr. Dan Mirvish. How you doing, sir?
Hey Nick, great to see you again, man.
Great to see you. So, what you been up to?
The main thing is I made a little movie called 18 and a half, which is we shot it during the pandemic, right before and right in the middle of the pandemic. And it is a Watergate thriller slash comedy that is more or less about a young woman in the Nixon White House who gets a hold of the missing 18 and a half minute gap from the Watergate tapes and tries to leak it to a reporter, and they run afoul of hippies, swingers, and nefarious people out to get them. And we had a great time making the film, and had a fantastic festival run. We played about 25 festivals on 4 continents, and we've had a 60-city theatrical release already in the US, and it's been a 6-month release of the film. So the film is still in theaters, and actually will be next month as well. And then meanwhile, it's been playing on airlines. Yeah, as you say, high, low, and everywhere in between. Airlines, VOD, cable, all kinds of interesting places. So, so that's been keeping me busy. That's the short version.
That's the short version, which is cool. So, all right, you have a track record of making interesting films, and I say that as someone who has reviewed a few of them. I've seen a few of them. You everything going back. I mean, you've done everything from musicals. You've done adaptations. Where was the genesis for the idea for 18 and a half?
So for 18 and a half, it kind of evolved from my last film, which was called Bernard and Huey, which was written by famous screenwriter and cartoonist Jules Feiffer. That's actually some of his work back there. And and on the last day of shooting, it happened to coincide with the presidential election of 2016. And the next day I went out to see, and we were shooting the last couple of days in New York, so I went out to see Pfeiffer to show him dailies. And at the time he was living on Shelter Island, which is near the Hamptons, on the tip of Long Island. And I went out there actually with my friend Terry Keefe, who lives out there. He drove me over there, and we, showing dailies to Jules, but naturally we were talking about the election. And Pfeiffer had been a cartoonist for the Village Voice for 40 years, and particularly in the early 70s. He won a Pulitzer Prize for political cartooning, largely for his illustrations and cartoons about Nixon. There's a picture he did of Nixon actually for us that day, I think.
And hats.
So inevitably we talked about comparisons between Trump and Nixon, and how many impeachments could we possibly have in the next 4 years, and things like that. And then that night I wound up staying at Terry was at the time running his family motel, which is called the Silver Sands Motel, which is in Greenport, New York, which is just over the ferry. You take a short ferry ride from Shelter Island. And this place was built in the 50s and 60s by Terry's grandparents, and he had kind of taken it over about 10 years ago. And he's a pretty savvy filmmaker himself, so he knew to kind of keep it vintage. And because of that, he had been getting a ton of fashion shoots out there, high-end Harper's, Vogue kind of fashion shoots. That that took advantage of the kind of the vintage look of it. But we were walking around the property, and I was like, this kind of looks like 1974. And he says, well, no one's ever shot a feature here. If you come up with an idea, we're closed in the winter. Everyone in the cast and crew can stay out here. I was like, wow. Well, we were just talking about Nixon and Watergate, and this looks like 74. So, the hardest part to making any kind of period film on indie budget or anything else is the location. So you got that wrapped up, you're pretty much done. So we committed to making the movie, and then I teamed up with a writer, and then later became my producing partner, Daniel Moya. Coincidentally, his aunt and uncle owned a diner just down the street from the Silver Sands. And so now we had 2 locations. Now you have to make a movie.
Now you have to.
That's
That's
in
the
the book.
rule.
Yeah, it's in the book.
No, it's interesting. The hotel reminded me a lot of, or the hotel motel would it be considered
Well, motel,
motel. It,
motel and cottages.
yes, it reminded me a lot of this place I worked at when I was in my early 20s, in on Cape Cod. Very
Oh yeah.
similar. Yep, it was in Orleans in Cape Cod. It was owned by a mother and son. The mother had had it open for however long, and it had that 60s 70s vibe, to the point where we're talking early 2000s. So customers were like, "There's nothing updated here." I'm like, "That's the Cape." Like, you're here to get away from stuff. That's why there's no Wi-Fi. Not that there was like a huge amount of Wi-Fi at that time, but like that's why there's no Wi-Fi. That's why there's no cable television. That's why whatever. But they also had the similar situation of like there was the motel area where people drove up and they had their stuff, but then they had the cottages that they rented separately. And I'm like, wow, this is taking me back. Maybe not so far to the 70s personally, but to my own working late 20 or early 20s. So it was really interesting. So right now I'm finding that there are some independent films out there, yours being one of them, believe it or not, Terrifier 2 being another one. I can't believe those are both going into the same sentence, but marketing seems to be is what's pushing these films over the top and keeping them in public interest. You yourself are a really, really outspoken advocate for every film you've ever made, more so than almost any other filmmaker that I know. And you're always finding the angle to put stuff. I've watched your Twitter, and it's crazy because anything that is even remotely, not even necessarily political, you will find a way to shoehorn 18 and a half so far up their anus. It just you find that nugget of a way to kind of promote it in there. Where do you get off? No, where do you get kind of the inspiration to do a lot of the stuff that you do? Because you have a history, my friend, of doing let's call it, I don't want to call it stunts, but you've done some shit in the past that you and I have talked about, fictional characters that you've created, all of these different things, potential fictional characters you've created. You have just this weird track record of just doing all of this stuff, and this I guess goes even back to your time with Slam Dance. It's like you are subversive at every turn. Where does that come from?
Well, my mom was in PR, so
And there it is.
I kind of learned it from her. I mean, I remember at 3 years old in preschool, like cutting up newspaper clippings because my mom was working at a newspaper at the time in Omaha, and like gluing them into a thing. And I still do that. I still collect clips.
Now it's just ransom notes.
So yeah, no, I kind of learned early from her, but I guess that's where it comes from. But I also, when I worked in Washington, I worked as a journalist for a while at the Washington Monthly Magazine, and I've written articles for everyone from the New York Times to Filmmaker Magazine. So having worked as a journalist, I kind of think like them a little bit, but also having worked in a press office in the Senate. I was a speechwriter for Senator Tom Harkin for about a year and a half, but it was part of the press office. So, writing press releases and doing that sort of thing, sort of came naturally to me when I came to Hollywood.
Well, I mean, Hollywood is the PR machine, and the reason why I also even, compared it slightly or said Terrifier 2 in the same breath space there is because the one thing I see is your film, that film. There are others. Ty West is killing it right now with X and Pearl and all that kind of stuff too, and I know that's more of an A24 thing, but all of these movies they're everywhere, and they continue to open in more and more places, and they continue to I guess, subvert expectation in a way as well. Like, you know, like I said, part of that is because of you being the real mouthpiece of your film, which I think more filmmakers should take a note of. I'm like, well, how do I, for every filmmaker who sits there and says, well, how do I get a 60 theater release, or how do I get this, that, or the other thing? It's like, oh, well, you have to talk about it. Like, you have to, like, you wake up and you have, this is why I always talk about a marketing plan, a marketing strategy, or whatever, and maybe some kind of a budget. But what are some of the ways that you have been able to kind of long tail this release out? I mean, do you have this? How much of this is flying by the seat of your pants and waiting for the next announcement to happen to you versus things that you are planning to be done?
So, no, it's a great question, and thanks for all the kind words. I mean, to give you an idea, like, sometimes it is just fly by the seat of my pants. Like last week, I was in New York and was getting ready to meet my producing partner, Daniel. We were going to drive out to New Jersey for a screening. And he lives around the corner from IFC, the IFC Center, the theater there.
Mm-hmm.
And we had screened. So I walked past there, and then as I was walking past, I remembered, oh yeah, when did we play here? We played here like the beginning of June, and it was a week after we had played at Lemley's in LA. And I was like, oh wow, it's been 6 months that we have been in theaters. And that was just an angle that I hadn't really thought of. But then it occurred to me that, that same week, it was like a week ago, was the big announcement that Rian Johnson's film, Knives Out, Glass Onion.
Glass Onion, yeah.
The new Knives Out film was going to get a big 1-week theatrical release in 400 theaters, before showing up on Netflix. And, I love Rian. He was a PA on my first film. I've known him since he was, I think, 18. But I'm thinking that's an interesting comparison. Like, yeah, you can have a film on Netflix and be made for millions of dollars, but you're only getting a 1-week release. Whereas, our film, I realized we'd been in theaters pretty much continuously for 6 months. So I just posted a little video about that. But so part of it is kind of looking for the angles, looking for the metric of success that nobody else is looking for. That's
Sure.
The real secret. Like right now, nobody's thinking about like how many months did you play in a theater, except maybe Memoria or that film. But otherwise, everyone's trying to go straight to do day and date VOD or go get the biggest streaming deal they can. But but you can have 100 million people watch a film on a streamer on Netflix and not have any engagement with the audience whatsoever. No discussion, no comments, nothing. And I think that's a real disservice to filmmakers in general. But it's an interesting contrast to what we've been doing, which is basically touring the film nonstop for over a year between festivals and then the theatrical release and everything else. And constantly having Q&As and introductions and kind of an interesting back and forth and dialogue with with audiences and with critics and well.
I'm seeing that as being it's definitely roadshow or type of aspects of independent film especially are nothing new to the scene, but I am seeing it picking up a little bit of renewed interest, because for a lot of the reasons why you're saying, it gives you a reason to connect with your audience in person that is different than just what we're doing now on the show here, and anyone who might be watching us at home. But also you get to do the Q&A, you get to sell merch, you get to you get to I feel like that personal touch goes further. I mean, folks like yourself, folks like Kevin Smith, what he's done with Clerks 3, what he's done with what he did with he kind of did that. I think he did that with Tusk as well when it was first released. He did that with Yoga Hosers as well. That roadshow release strategy seems to really get, and I know it probably takes a little bit to set up ahead of time because you have to have some booking dates already, there. You don't just show up and go like, can we play here? I mean, I think there's some conversation that might come like that, but like to some degree, you have to, you have to kind of have stuff planned out a little bit. Because you got to book your travel too, I'm guessing. Although he had the bus, but he's Kevin, so he can do that. But it seems like that connection with the audience is important. Neither of us anymore are spring chickens, and so I know that when new things are being introduced, whether it was Reels on Instagram or TikTok or any of these other things, I look at some of that and my immediate, and this is coming from an ex-IT person, my immediate kind of thing is, I don't want to do that. Why would I do that? You seem to be picking up very well on pretty much any new technology that is being put out there to connect and engage with your audience. Do you find it difficult at all to, do you find it difficult at all to kind of keep up with everything?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. It always is, and I'm not on Snapchat, but that was cool 3 years ago anyway. So who knows what's the cool thing is now? But
FilmSnobbery Live is the cool thing right now.
Exactly. But I have done some TikToks and stuff. But I mean, if you go back in my history, I've always kind of embraced whatever the new technology is. I mean, on my first film, Omaha the movie, we had a deal. This is we shot the movie in 93, 94, but and did the festivals in 95 and self-distribution in 96. But then by I think 2000 or 1999, I forget exactly which, you remember DVDs were the hot new thing. Well, somehow we got a deal where our film showed up on DVD as the free sample in every Pioneer DVD player sold in North America. It was a run of over 1/3 copies of our movie got shoved into every.
Do those count as sales?
Well, they count as whatever you want them to count as. I mean, the bottom line is 1/3 people started their DVD collection with my movie, whether they wanted it or not.
Right. So you were the first U2. Remember when U2 put their album on iPods and they had to go around and do the apology tour for that? Exactly. You were like the progenitor of that.
Yeah. So anyway, whatever the hot new technology is, I'll happily embrace it. But I think what's interesting, going back a little bit to what you were saying earlier about the roadshow thing, is that, and part of this I think is in the context of post-pandemic, or I'm not really sure if we're in post yet, but anyway, but the long tail of the
we'll fix it in post.
Yeah, is that there's been a bit of a fuzziness or confluence between film festivals and a theatrical release. I think on the one hand, theaters are realizing if they want people to come back to theaters and get off the couch and not just watch Netflix, they need to bring in filmmakers and have Q&As, and they can do it on Zoom too if need be, and because now everyone's kind of been normalized to that technology. So they need to kind of do more to eventize screenings. And likewise, I think a lot of festivals are now running their own year-round theatrical screenings. So whether it's Seattle Film Festival, Tallgrass Film Festival, Florida Film Festival. So we played a lot of those where technically it's not necessarily part of the festival, but it is part of their year-round screening. So, right. Which is great.
Well, it's also because some of these festivals have also realized, and some of them are lucky enough to have the dedicated space to be able to do it too. So it's not like a lot of festivals where they have to rent out, for a block, a period, a thing. Like, they either have the relationship or they own the thing. Sidewalk is another one of those things where they have their sidewalk cinema. There's a good amount of those things that are able to kind of do that. Salem. Up here in Salem, Massachusetts, was it Cinema Salem or something? I can't remember what it's called now, which I feel bad about. They have that too. You're absolutely right. Like being able to kind of be a part of the community, because I think at that point it's less about a big event and more about being part of the community and the community investment. And I think that's almost as powerful. But I do remember you tweeting recently about the importance of film festivals as part of your distribution strategy and looking at it as an, a form of distribution. And I tend to agree with that, you know.
Yeah, well, and that's the other sort of change that's happened since the pandemic is a lot more festivals are paying screening fees, or especially kind of during 2021, early 22, when a lot of festivals kind of came back from their all virtual years and then they became hybridized. But during that virtual year, and especially into the hybrid version of festivals, people, filmmakers were getting revenue sharing from, certainly from the online components. And all of a sudden, it meant that you could make money on the festival circuit. I mean, we did.
Yeah.
It's not a lot of money, but it's enough to kind of keep going and enough to justify it. But also, philosophically, I think filmmakers need to see distribution not just as a transactional thing, like, oh, am I going to get money? Is some distributor going to find me? Like, no, are you going to find an audience? That's distribution. And if you're thinking about that, like in audience engagement, how many people are going to see my film? Festivals have always been the best way to do that. Festivals do, for the most part, do a really great job of getting an audience into your screening, better than you could do even if you had a theatrical run. So, and until you've had a theatrical run, you don't always appreciate, how few people show up sometimes. But most festivals do a great job getting people there. But that's what I mean. That is philosophically, that is your distribution, or your distribution starts with festivals. It is not for the most part or shouldn't be a goal or a means to an end. It is the end, for a lot of filmmakers. You shouldn't just see it as, oh, I must get into the right festival so the right distributor sees the film or the right agent goes there. It's like, no, there's a lot of festivals around, 98% of festivals don't have industry people showing up, but they do have audiences coming.
Yep.
That's your goal. The goal isn't to get distribution. The goal is to distribute your film. And there's a real difference between active and passive voice there.
Yeah. No, I agree, and you're also an author. You've published a few books at this point, and so you I think also understand the importance of like getting it in the hands of the end user, whether it's via traditional publishing or self-publishing, or the same kind of rings true for filmmakers. I mean, the festival circuit is really the filmmaking equivalent of self-distribution. You know what I mean? And I think, in a way, I mean, you're putting it out there ostensibly for a lot of, for all intents and purposes for free, and hoping that people buy into what you're doing. Going off of what you're saying too, the idea is that there is an opportunity to make money there. There's an opportunity to recoup investment if you're, you can find the opportunities. I think self-publishing is very similar. But I think everyone longs for the traditional publishing or the traditional distribution of their product because that's what they've been conditioned to want. And I think you summed it up really well. And so you're forgetting what the end goal was. The end goal was to make something that people can see. And I think that's a kind of on your end of a powerful statement, especially coming from someone like yourself who's had, you've seen the best of every world on the independent film circuit for years now. That said, one thing I noticed about your films, going back to, Omaha and everything, of course, but from the films I've gotten a chance to review or see or whatever, so looking at like Between Us, Bernard and Huey, and then, of course, 18 and a Half, I wanted to talk a little bit about your cast, because every freaking movie you have has a phenomenal cast. And of course, this one, you have people both in front of the camera, but also voice actors that are, you're getting all the legends. You're getting them together. And
let's tell people who's in the cast.
Willa Fitzgerald. Oh, come on, Willa Fitzgerald. Will is great, by the way, in this whole thing, and I bought her as a absolute '70s real person. Like if you were to say at the end of this based on a true story, I would have been like, yeah, that looks like she could have been that person. And then of course you have Ted Raimi, you have Bruce Campbell in the background. Jim Rash, I think, came back from no, you had him on Bernard and Huey, but I could have no, okay.
Yeah.
See, yeah, I'm not going to remember everyone.
John Cryer.
John Cryer, that's it. Yeah, Lex Luthor himself, or at least one of the more modern ones.
Yeah.
And I'm forgetting. I know.
Yeah, well, I mean, Richard Kind is in it.
Richard Kind.
Bondi Curtis Hall, John McGarrow,
That's the one.
Kathy Curtin, Sullivan Jones, and who else were we forgetting? I mentioned Richard Kind, and Lloyd Kaufman has a tiny cameo too.
Lloyd Kaufman. Yep. What is your casting process look like? And is it easy because you tend to keep a lot of your films very intimate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's first of all, I find or write or adapt material that I know is going to be attractive to actors. And whether that's a musical, a play adaptation, an adaptation of a Jules Feiffer screenplay, but actors know who Jules is, or even 18 and a half, even though it's an original script that Dan Moya and I wrote, it's kind of the pedigree that it has is the Nixon era. The Watergate is its pedigree. So so I can call someone like Bruce Campbell and say, hey Bruce, do you want to play the voice of Nixon? And he'd be like, yeah, I'd love to play the voice of Nixon. So or Cryer to play Haldeman. Those they know what those roles are and who they are. But they're also, we spent a lot of time on the script to make sure that all the characters were well written and well-rounded, characters with good dialogue and monologues when they needed to be, and because actors love monologues. And then the key thing is, and this is something I learned from Robert Altman years ago. I work with his grandson Dana, who's still one of my producing partners, and something Bob taught us was set a start date, tell everyone the train's leaving the station, and you on or you off. And 18 and a half is a really good example of that, because if we had delayed even by a week, we probably never would have made this movie to this date, because we ran into the pandemic. We shot 11 days and then we had to take a 6-month healthy hiatus. So if we had waited a week or 2 weeks for, a different cast or a perfect cast or a named person to come back from their wedding or pilot season or whatever other scheduling obstacles there were, we never would have made the movie. So instead, my approach is always, if you can cast in advance, great. John McGarrow was attached for a long time. Willow was someone we'd met with like 6 months earlier, but hadn't really committed to her until about a week before shooting. But Bondi Curtis Hall and Kathy Curtin, we only cast them about 4 or 5 days into the movie, and they're two of the biggest characters in the movie. So, but the reality is, actors, sure they need to work. A lot of them need to work for money, but the ones that don't, because they've done movies and TV and Marvel shows and Netflix shows, they're it's really more about scheduling and availability than anything else. As long as the parts are good and they're available and their proximity is close. In this case, we were shooting, we used almost entirely a New York-based cast, and then they're happy to do it. And then for the voice performances, that was an easy get, because it was, hey, do you want to do 2 hours of voice work sometime in the future in post-production? Yeah, sure, easy peasy, And ultimately, we wound up doing that into the pandemic, during June of 2020, when actors weren't doing anything. They couldn't do TV, film, theater, anything. And we realized that we had Zoom by this point, and everybody had, halfway decent microphones.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were able to do those voice performances essentially over Zoom. And that was great. It was a real shot in the arm for all of us to know that, at the worst possible time in human history, we could still be creative. We could still be working on the movie and put on a show, And that was a real, kick for all of us.
It's so funny. You make it sound almost easy. Like, no, we put out, we did this and that led to this, which led to this, which led to this, which is all logically sound. I mean, everything you're saying sound. Even doing it during the pandemic, you had a situation where you were fortunate enough to be filming in the motel off season. So were you able to basically kind of bubble up at that point with most of the cast that, in the
Well,
crew?
for those first 11 days, I mean, we were pretty much in our own little bubble. It was close to hermetically sealed as we could get. And in fact, the DGA came out like on our 10th day and was like, oh, wow, you guys are doing great out here. Everyone else is shut down across North America. You're like one of the last 2 films shooting in North America.
Wow.
Like, wait, hang on a second. What does everyone know that we don't know? But what it meant, so then we shut down the next day and we still had 4 days left to go. But what it meant is when we came back, which was 6 months later in September 2020, and by this point, SAG and DGA had agreed on all the on-set protocols. And it turned out that we were following most of those protocols kind of pretty naturally anyway. We were remote, we were in a bubble. And also we had already shot our kind of kissing scenes, our fighting scenes, our dancing scenes, anything intimate that we would not have been able to shoot in September of that year, we had already shot them. So we didn't really have to rewrite the script or use blow-up dolls or anything funky that a lot of people were doing at that time. And everybody had their own room, everybody had their own bathroom. Like all that stuff was a pretty easy adaptation for us because we were doing a lot of that already.
I would say that's absolutely fortunate that you were able to kind of do that. Did you have a situation where, once you had to take 6 months off, was there ever any trepidation of like, is stuff going to match when we come back? Or are we going to have to do more work with the cast to get them back into character, or to, what were their challenges with having to take that break?
Well, the good news was nobody on the cast had put on weight or lost weight that hadn't been, that we had already shot before. We'd only shot 4 of the actors in that first part. Those last 4 days were when we were bringing people in. So I think someone like Richard Kind actually did lose quite a lot of weight during those first 6 months, but we hadn't shot with him before. So it didn't really matter. I think our sound recordist had put on a bunch of weight, but he's never on camera, so that was okay. So that didn't matter. I think Willa's hair was a little bit different, but not hugely different. Like it wasn't like, it's not like she had gotten a buzz cut, or something like that. So everyone's hair pretty well matched. So we're very lucky that way.
What are some of the biggest changes that you've had to adapt to?
Oh, from that was the one concern we had, was that the foliage wouldn't match, because the first part of the shoot was in March. There were no leaves on the trees. Second part of the shoot in September, there's still leaves.
There's still leaves on the trees.
So we had to adjust kind of camera angles to not see trees as much as before.
It was funny. There were a few times where I was like, they are purposely shooting out towards the ocean. I could tell because they're trying to stay within a certain field of view here. But that was great. I mean, that's taking advantage of what you have, and who doesn't want to look at the water, Yeah.
And again, we were pretty lucky in the kinds of scenes that we had that we could do things like that.
I was going to say, has there been any challenges really, or any differences as you have continued over the last 20 years making movies? Has it been that long? I was going to say, when was the year you made your first movie?
We shot it in fall of 93. So,
93.
I know. I was 10 years old at the time. Can you believe it, Nick? It's shocking.
I believe all of that. Now, has there been any challenges that, as you have gone through movie to movie to movie, and not just in the shooting, because obviously technology changes, but I think some of that is overcome by the fact that you're hiring people who know how to use the equipment. You're not out there specifically with the camera yourself. You have a DP or you have a whatever, even if you do, you might get a little tutorial ahead of time, but for the specific shot you're trying to get. But I meant, more of like, as the industry has changed, have there been challenges that you're like, oh shit, I was not prepared for that? Or do you find that the more things change, the more they kind of stay the same, and this is just an adaptation to something else that came before it.
Yeah, it really is the latter. It's and also having known, filmmakers that were in their 80s when I was in film school, and hearing stories about how, independent movies and B movies were shot in the 40s and 30s and 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. Like, nothing has changed, literally nothing has changed. I mean, yeah, you're right. The technology changes a little bit, but the process of raising money, scrounging for cast, crew, equipment, none of that has really changed over the years. I mean, the certain scales of digital is cheaper than film, but film is still the thing that'll get you into festivals. Like, those things stay the same. And the necessity to promote your film, that's the real consistent thing. I mean, in the 30s, people would show up on stages at theaters with a cow and like give away the cow as a giveaway. Like, you
Yep.
do all these, they had all these crazy stunts that people did in the 30s to get people to movies in the 20s. So that was 100 years ago.
Yep.
That hasn't changed at all. Like,
I was
I mean, I always say, like, when I was starting out, I had to put on a sandwich board in front of the theater at Lemley's in LA. I still put on a sandwich board when I go in front of a theater. I wear a sandwich board everywhere I go almost. And whether you're wearing a physical sandwich board like I do, or a digital one and going on Twitter and TikTok and whatever else, if you're not putting yourself out there in that upfront way, no one else is going to do it for you. And so that mentality hasn't changed at all.
Yeah, I was just having a discussion with my wife the other day about, and again, I'm going to go back to Terrifier because we were talking about, oh, they're rolling out on another now 1,000+ theaters, or they're doing this, and I said, and then you hear the reports of like people throwing up in the audience, and people are passing out because it's so terrifying and whatever, and I'm like, how much of that goes back? Are they just doing the old Alfred Hitchcock Psycho trick, where here, sign this little thing that says you waive all indemnity here because if in case you get too scared. How much of this is the old matinee trick with John Goodman versus actual terror? Now, I finally watched the movie last night and I really enjoyed it, but for completely different reasons. But how much of promotion and self-promotion is fabricating your own story, fabricating your own marketing, finding the thing that you think is, oh, this is what people will talk about, and go.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be at least thematically consistent with the film itself, and true to your own character.
Yeah.
You can't kind of fake that part of it. And if it's consistent, if you're doing, if you're showing up with a cow in front of a movie, and it's first cow, and you're Kelly Reichardt, you could get away with that. You could have gotten away with that. If that film didn't open in the middle at the beginning of the pandemic, maybe she would have done that. But that stuff doesn't work with turgid Holocaust traumas necessarily.
Right.
So it's got to be, I mean, we're lucky with 18 and a half. We're a little bit, it's a little bit of a goofy movie. I mean, it has some serious themes in it for sure.
Was there ever concern with some of those more serious themes that I guess to some degree are repeating themselves in modern history?
We took advantage of that. I mean, not for nothing, we released the film to coincide with the 50th anniversary of Watergate, which was last summer in June. But then coincidentally, the January 6th committee hearings wound up being kind of in that exact same timeline, in June, July. And there were some remarkable coincidences, especially between the Cassidy Hutchinson testimony and what Willa's character goes through in the film. They even kind of look alike. So, so I'm not going to leave that on the table. You know, we made a point of telling people about that.
Yeah.
And a lot of, you know, critics and journalists, you know, made note of that, and hopefully audiences too. Like, oh wow, you know, this really is a story about a young woman working in the White House who gets a hold of powerful information and can bring down the presidency, and does she have the fortitude to do it? Well, that's the theme of our movie. I mean, that's literally it.
Yeah.
So, you know, that if that didn't dovetail with what was going on in the you know, public dialogue, I don't know what would.
Has there ever been a time, as you've been taking this out there, where some people have been taking the message of the film the wrong way, and maybe at times you might have felt unsafe being somewhere, being like, okay, I think I'm going to take the sandwich board off just for today because these people are nutso? Or do you lean into it and go like, well, I tell you what you need to do. You need to buy a ticket and go see this movie, and then you'll see it's really not about that, and you can make up your own mind, do your own research, as it were, you know? Or, you know, how do you win over... I know I'm literally asking two different questions here, but I think you see where I'm going with it. It's like, how do you win over that audience, and how at the same time do you keep yourself, in a world where people are flying off the handle left and right, keep yourself safe in, you know, after making a politically charged film that is about whistleblowers and about, you know, an impeached president and all these kind of things, and people are going to make their own connections, you know?
Well, the nice thing is that, you know, and this is very much intentional. One reason to make a period film that reflects on current events is that people kind of can read into it what they want, and that's actually been pretty interesting. You know, when we showed the film at the Sao Paulo International Festival, everyone there thought, oh, this is really all about Bolsonaro. And when we showed it at the Manchester Film Festival, where I won the Best Director prize, you know, everyone was like, oh, this is really about Boris Johnson and his scandals, and how it's, you know, it started with a goofy scandal, and then the cover-up was worse than the crime. And then he resigned, like, also the week we came out in the UK on VOD, so that worked out great.
Everything's always coming up Mirvish.
I know. What are the odds? But no, I mean, we're very proud of the fact that, you know, among our investors and backers, we had everyone from, you know, a Bill Clinton speechwriter to a Trump-appointed ambassador. You know, so politically, there's a little bit of something that anyone could take from it if they want to. And again, because when it comes to Nixon, everybody kind of is fairly united on Nixon, and which is really a little bit about what the film is about, was people wrestling with that. I mean, Connie is a Republican in the movie, you know, who then has to wrestle with her own conscience about that. And that was actually the pivotal thing about the 18.5-minute gap during the Watergate scandal, which lasted 2.5 years. But I think it was the absurdity of the 18.5-minute gap and Nixon's excuses for it, and saying that, oh, it was Rosemary Woods and she pushed the button and she had to do the stretch. That was really when he lost his own party, was when public opinion started to collapse.
The old, if you're going to lie to me better.
Yeah, exactly. So, we haven't had to worry personally about it. Yeah, I haven't. Strangely enough, I would have thought I would have gotten more death threats by now, but no. The most uncomfortable I had to do with sort of masking and COVID issues and things like that. I remember at the Anchorage Film Festival in December of last year. You know, we were at a dive bar with a bunch of filmmakers, and there was a scary-looking military type dude who was like, "Show me," you know, and I was wearing my, you know, of course I'm wearing my 18.5 mask, you know, and he's like, you know, take your mask off so I can see you're a real American, you know.
Okay.
We're outnumbered here, you know. So anyway,
speaking of,
that was a single weirdest thing that happened to me.
Okay.
That I remember, but otherwise, no, everyone's been pretty cool about the movie. And you know, if nice. and you know, the weird thing about showing during COVID, it's like, if you want to see it live, we've had opportunities to see it live. If you don't want to see it live, I totally respect that too. You don't have to see it live, you know. So you know, so you have to accommodate, you know, everybody. You know, you want to see it on an airplane, we got you covered. You know, you want to see it in the privacy of your living room, no worries. You know, see it on Amazon.
Well, and if they want to hear the soundtrack, they can hear the soundtrack,
Exactly,
because
on
Dan Mirvish is
Spotify.
nothing if not the master of branding. You have your mask, but you also have, yes, the 18 and a half soundtrack
That's right.
on
So
vinyl.
yeah, yeah. So our we have an amazing soundtrack. Luis Guerra is our composer, and we have a wonderful singer named Caro Pieroto who's Brazilian but lives in L.A. And it was a true international collaboration. This is actually one of the nice things about the pandemic is we recorded a lot in L.A., but also we had a horn section in Mexico City. We had people work on it in Brazil. It was I wrote the lyrics to the songs, but they got translated into Portuguese. So anyway, and Luis and I wanted to release the full soundtrack on vinyl, full 12-inch vinyl. But there was a year backlog because of Taylor Swift and Adele had put their records out, their last couple records out on vinyl, and there's limited capacity, but there's increased demand for vinyl now. Anyway, so we found there was one loophole that I found, which is that during the Cold War, behind the Iron Curtain, they used to smuggle in rock and roll from the West and press records onto used medical X-rays. And these flexible discs were called bones because you could see the bones in them.
Huh.
And anyway, there's still a pressing plant in the Czech Republic that will print these flexible discs. Now they're not all on. I think you have to pay extra if you want them on actual X-rays, but we got them done onto these little
Wow.
7-inch singles. And so we have two of our songs on here, Brasilia Bella and Wonder Bread, which are two of our kind of key thematic songs in the movie. And they only had like a 12-week turnaround. So we were able to get these out in time to play to sell at some of our festival screenings and theatrical screenings. So basically, we're not really selling them online. You have to come to a live screening if you want to get one. You have to find me, and I will sell them to you. So anyway, but if you don't want that, if you can't find me in person, that's all right, because the whole soundtrack is available on Spotify now. So
Nice.
just search for the 18 and a half soundtrack on
Nice.
Spotify, and it is there.
Look, 18 and a half. Is it under like your like the 18 and a half
Yeah,
soundtrack?
yeah.
Like
Look
you
for
search it
it
out, it's
under
easy to
18
find.
and a half original motion picture soundtrack, either Luis Guerra or Dan Mirvish. We were already listed as number one earlier this summer on BMI's like monthly list of film soundtracks, ahead of Danny Elfman's Doctor Strange soundtrack, which we were
Wow.
like, oh my God, wow, how did we do that? So it's already getting a lot of really nice critical attention, just the music by itself. So that's been really gratifying.
And I see that you guys are vying for all of the awards. You're
All of them.
looking at, I know Gotham
We're
nominations are
came out today, did not get one. Thank
son of a bitch. If it makes you feel better, I got my South by Southwest panel picker rejection today too, which I know are two different things. That's like
you.
that's like you saying I lost my house in a tornado, and that's like me saying my toilet doesn't flush hard enough. But
Well, there's actually, to be fair, there is a common thread there, which is Penske Media.
son of a bitch.
They own half of South by, and I think about a third of the nominating committee on the Gotham's work for Penske Media.
The only thing that like
Saying.
frustrates me a little bit more on it is that my wife is on the panel picker advisory board.
Oh, that is.
That hurts.
I can't help you.
That's the knife in the yeah. She goes, I don't understand why. I said, I think I gotta have a clue.
But no, I mean, look, they picked some terrific
Yeah.
films for the Gothams, and it is a tribute that there are so many fantastic indie films out
Totally.
there. And but
This has been a good year for indie.
Gothams doesn't have as many categories as, for example, the Spirit
Spirit
Awards.
Awards. Yeah.
Spirit Awards has cinematography, it has it has editing, it has a bunch of other. It has a category, the John Cassavetes Award for under $1 million budgets, which the Gothams doesn't have that distinction. So, anyways, the Spirit Awards, the Oscars, we are vying for Best Song in a weird way. Indie films their best chance of getting an Oscar is in the best song category, because the playing field is actually level there as opposed to pretty much every other category.
Was
So
that the
look,
one that you had created for last? It was best. Yeah, you like what had to,
that was best original musical in
best original musical.
2004,
That's what it was.
which is
Okay.
still on the books. They still have the Mirvish rule as part of it. They rewrote the rules because of me, and so they now have the Mirvish rule as part of the best original musical category. Our film does not qualify as best original musical because we have 4 original songs with lyrics, and you need 5. But in any case, but I did that whole process, which is a whole long story in and of itself, which I encourage people.
You absolutely strike me as the type of person, and I've known you for years now, and it really has not like sunk into almost right this second that like you are absolutely a person that says you need to know the rules in order to break them.
Yeah.
And it seems like you kind of you will look for every loophole, and not in a bad way of just, you know, like it's not malicious in any way. It might be a little malicious to the system, but not to, you know, not to, you know, take advantage or disadvantage anybody else. It's almost more of just like look, you know, we know that these things to some degree are contests that favor certain things. And so you need every advantage you can get in order to kind of put yourself and your work forward. And to not take advantage of that is doing a disservice to you and all the people that worked on this stuff. You know, because they want to see their work win awards and all that too, so they can say I was a part of that, and it might get them staffed on something, you know, next because they were a part of it. You know, it's a I feel like it's a big thing when you are going through your entire process here, making the movie, selling the movie. You go through the festival circuit, you go through all this. Is award season always in your mindset of like, okay, well, we always need to prepare for award season, regardless of how it's received. We're going to vie for something, or is there ever been a time where you just been like, I don't think this is a good year?
No, I think it's valuable, and the value in it is
Because no one's like, I've never heard anybody do a course on award season. Like, you know, like everyone will talk about film festivals. I talk about film festivals endlessly. But like, you know, in every book I've got a shelf full of books over here, yours included, that talks about, you know, every aspect of filmmaking. I got Lloyd over there, I got Kevin, I got you, I've got Rodriguez, I've got freaking Robert Evans. I got everyone here talking about making a movie. Not one person goes, oh, and by the way, here's how you run an Oscar race. That's crazy.
Well, partially because the people that know how to do it keep it very tight. Like there is a very small group of publicists. It's not even the distributors themselves; it's the publicists who really keep that information on lockdown, because they know how valuable it is to know who's on which committee and that kind of thing, and who's on, you know, this secret committee and that secret nominating committee. And if you're one of those publicists that has the secret list, you can get paid a lot of money by a distributor. What's a lot harder is for an individual filmmaker to kind of break through without a distributor. I mean, we're lucky we've had some great distributors helping us out, but not on awards. They just can't afford it. It's not really.
Who's the distributor for 18 and a half?
Well, who isn't is the better question, because part of what we did was we split up the rights in a lot of interesting ways. So the first deal we made was with an airline distributor, which is a company called Gate 23, because I had done a lot of research on them and I knew them, and there's a chapter in my book about airline distribution, and I'd written an article for Filmmaker magazine about it. So that was the first deal we did. Then we have an international sales company called 101 Films, but they also had a sister company to the US and UK VOD release, as well as TV sales. So now it's played. So they got the deal with Sky Cinema in the UK, and it is going to be on a premium cable channel, I can't say which one yet, in the US starting in the spring. And then we have a great company called Adventure Entertainment that did the theatrical release. Now we work very closely with them. They got most of the bookings. I helped get some, but they've been great. A guy named Henry out of Colorado, but it's actually an Australian-owned company. And they're kind of new to the theatrical sort of dramatic narrative world. But Tom Putnam's a good friend of mine. He'd worked with them before. So anyway, so we have this, and what's great about it is everyone all kind of came together and brought their own resources. We had publicists working in different countries, all working together, kind of at our behest and coordinating the efforts. And I think that's what's and I think that's been a good model, which is that whether you have distribution or you're doing it yourself, you need to sort of control the messaging, in a
Control the
consistent
narrative.
way. Yeah, and get the distributors to work together and get their resources, their publicity resources, not to duplicate and step on each other's toes. I mean, that was a big part of what we did during our kind of theatrical release leading up to the VOD, was kind of managing these publicists and say, okay, you do this and you do that, and then you do something else, so that we're not all, so that we're all kind of reading from the same, hymn book, whatever the phrase is. But
Yeah, well, you mean the handbook being the cheerful subversive guide to
yeah, there you go.
independent
Exactly.
filmmaking.
Exactly. So
Are you, when you are setting up for these movies and you're getting the budget together and you're in pre-production, how much money, not a dollar amount, but let's say percentage, do you typically say, look, we are very marketing heavy and marketing forward for our films because we know that that's how we give them a chance on the festival circuit, on the awards circuit, on, all this stuff. How much generally do you look at a budget and say X amount of this percentage is going to go towards marketing, and how often do people tend to try to talk you further down off of that?
almost zero. Mainly because I know that every dollar we get, um, oh, no, this is American Airlines calling me, I think, but uh,
Do you need to grab it?
no, it's I'll call them back. It's all right. Yeah, mainly because I know every dollar you have early on, you're going to need it to finish the film.
Okay.
You just, I mean, as much you can say, oh yes, we're going to reserve 20% for marketing or 50% for marketing, and the studios do that. I mean, they, half their budget is marketing. But on an indie level, no, you need every dollar just to get it in the can. So you can say that you're going to save money, but you're not going
So at what
to.
point? So are you basically? I mean, if you got to hire publicists, if you have to hire anyone who's going
Yeah,
to
that's
assist you, is
where
this
that's
all?
where you have to actually spend money is either at whatever your first festival is, you may have to spend $5,000 on a publicist. If it's Sundance, great, congrats. You may need to spend 10,000 or 20,000 on publicity and just flying in your cast or whatever. But if you're like us, where we played at a lot of really great festivals, but none that we really spent money on. Then we could save that money for a little bit of money on during the release, time. But by then, hopefully, you have distributors or distribution partners, or where you're, or even the theaters, that are spending some marketing money on the film. So most of what we do is basically free, social media stuff that we
Right.
do ourselves, and part of it is having a team, and having a community. I mean, we didn't even talk about crowdfunding, but we have about 400 backers on this film, and every time we have a crazy stunt or an idea, or a screening or a festival news, that's 400 people that can help magnify that messaging. So.
Okay. Do you have do you make a point to release something to all of these people every time you do something and it pans out? Do you release something and say, hey, tell your friends or tell whatever this is happening? I mean, above and beyond just like those people following you on Twitter, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, in addition to what I do on social media, I send an update to our backer community, which includes the cast and crew in most cases, about once a month,
Okay.
and it's been once a month since we started the process. So, and in fact, today we're having a little barbecue at my house with a handful of people. So,
Nice.
So yeah, when we can do live events, we'll do live events. But and that's also saved us money, because what it's meant is that it sounds like I've been touring with the film for a year, over a year, but it's not always me. It is, in many cases, it is one of my collaborators, either the writer producer, or the cinematographer, or the composer, or Kickstarter or Seed and Spark backers that we've had in different communities, especially with the vagaries of playing at festivals during the pandemic. There was no way we could safely or physically be every place all at once. And so, like, oh, great, we got invited to the River Run Film Festival, but oh, whoops, I guess I can't go there, because it costs too much to go, because the price of gas shot up that week. But that's okay, because one of our backers is there and he can handle the Q&A for us, So that's part of it, is building to support.
Do you got an extra couple of minutes if I want to ask you a couple more questions?
Yeah. I hung up on American Airlines.
Well, I mean, as you rightly should when you're on Film Snobbery Live. So, Mike, my question is that I want to ask about your experience with Seed and Spark, as far as what made you want to utilize them and their platform or their services aside that instead of, say, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, anything else that might be out there.
So I had used Kickstarter on my last two films and had great experiences with them, and was going to use them again on 18 and a half. And then the week that we were going to launch, Kickstarter had a bit of a scandal, which not too many people in the film press, in fact, no one in the film press covered. It was in the tech press a little bit, that they had some employees that wanted to unionize, and then they fired some of them. But it was kind of poised to become a bigger scandal. This is in like fall of 2019. So I said, you know what, I don't want to put myself or any of my backers like in the middle of a situation where in 3 weeks we're going to find out like, oh no, we have to boycott, Kickstarter, or I'm a union member, I can't be supporting them,
Right.
busting unions or whatever. So I'd known Emily and Seed and Spark for a long time, so it was a pretty easy switch to them. And look, the reality is about 85% of whatever crowdfunding or even equity funding that you do comes from your own people, your own network, your own social network. So it doesn't really make that much of a difference which platform you use.
Fair enough.
Answer.
No, it's good. I mean, as someone who's made so many movies at this point, and you've utilized crowdfunding, you've utilized traditional funding, all these different things, has the process of getting money to make movies gotten easier as you've progressed as a filmmaker? Do you find people knocking? I know I already see you not, shaking your head, but so I kind of know the answer. But the idea is like, are people beating down the door to be a part of the next Dan Mirvish joint?
Well, a little bit, not much, but a little bit. I mean, certainly, like, I have a lot of friends back in Nebraska where I grew up, where, when I go back there, they say, hey, Dan, when's the next film that we can give you money? And I was like, hang on a second, you want to give me money? Didn't you learn the last time? But, but part of the nice thing about crowdfunding is that it's kind of changed the paradigm of how we look at backing a film. You look at it, those people are considered backers. They're not investors, they're backers.
Right.
And they're not expecting you to return money to them. They, they get their mug or their, or their t-shirt or whatever, and they get to be part of the release and come to the premieres and come to the festivals. And for them, that's why they do it. They're not doing it whether, whether you're making money back or anything.
This isn't a hedge fund kind of situation.
Most of the equity investors that we have, and we do, and still 2/3 of the budget comes from equity investors. They're not really doing it to make money. They all have. I mean, that's be nice, but that they all have other reasons for it. And so, and the nice thing about all that too is that it's all tends to be cast agnostic financing, and that's the key to it. And that allows me to then not cast until 36 hours before we're shooting, because if you were doing traditional Hollywood financing, they'd be like, well, hang on a second, we're not giving you a dime until you show us that Tom Cruise is in the film. So that kind of financing dovetails the kind of casting that I do.
Because you don't have to worry about packaging, like you were just kind
Yeah,
of saying.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they know by now, and this is the part that gets a little easier, is by now they have enough confidence in me, maybe more than I have in myself, that I'm going to get somebody of some value, both financially but also talent, more importantly, in the film. Like we may not know exactly who, but we'll get somebody. And part of that is because I have a good network of contacts within the agency world and management world who represent actors. So I don't always know which actor I'm going to call, but I know which agents I'm going to call.
Do you ever still get that little bit of trepidation before you start a project where you go, this might be the one where it doesn't work out? I mean, you seem you seem like you always have your shit together. And even when you
Thank you.
don't have your shit together, you seem to find the way to make it come together. And I mean, that's a talent. I know that some of that is born out of the whole PR thing, controlling the narrative, controlling this, the marketing aspect of whatever stuff. I mean, like, you and I could sit here off camera and probably talk about the 10 things that are not going well or not going right now. But of course, the camera goes on and it's just like, but this is how we're spinning it. Do you still get, let's call it first day of school jitters?
Yeah, and look, I've heard Spielberg say in interviews, he gets that too before every every first day of shooting, and made the point that if you don't have that, you you might be doing something wrong. You may be a little overconfident.
What is your take on folks like Spielberg, Scorsese, etc., horning in on your festival, time, so to speak? I mean, Spielberg recently screening at TIFF. Scorsese, getting in on the festival circuit. I mean, these are guys that have been around forever. They don't need a festival circuit at all anymore because their awareness. It's not for them. It's not about awareness. I wouldn't think.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, good for Spielberg. It took him 70 years, but he finally got into TIFF, which tells you more about TIFF than it does about Spielberg, I think. If that's what it takes for an American, indie filmmaker to get into TIFF, you know, um, then that may be what it takes. Uh, the real problem is that the festival circuit doesn't have a real discovery festival for about 8 months of the year, for between Tribeca and Sundance.
Mm-hmm.
All the festivals, and there's plenty of good festivals during that 8 months time span, but there's no one festival where distributors are going, ooh, I want to see an undistributed film, and then bid on it. And TIFF isn't doing that. They're not with American films anyway.
Well, I mean, what is it about festivals that they should be able to do to, in your opinion, as a filmmaker, up their game to become that festival? Because I mean, I talk with all of them. You were just on the jury for Tallgrass,
Yeah,
and
great festival.
I was just at a couple of different festivals myself. But you and I are no. I mean, you co-founded a freaking film festival, so I mean, come on. Um, what is it about the festival circuit that it seems there's an elusivity to the mainstream to come and embrace these community organizations or these different things as a discovery process for content, if we're calling it that, but for art, for movies, for whatever. It seems like you're absolutely right. Like it's weird because I consider after South by, and I guess to some degree Tribeca, up until Sundance, I consider that to be the meat of the festival season. I look at that as like that's when I go to all of my, like, I call it the mid-tier festivals and stuff like that, and I can go and have a really great time watching good independent movies. But it's your mileage may vary on audience, participation, the level in which the festivals are able to engage with the community because of budget or whatever, or I don't know. I mean, there's a question in there somewhere. You'll find it.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a piece for Variety last year about this issue, and the problem is that there's and it dovetails with the award season, that there's so much focus on the award season in the fall and late summer and even early summer,
Yeah.
that that a lot of festivals during that time, even if they want to, they can't really show world premieres of indie films, because all those films are holding out for Sundance or South
Yeah.
by, whether, and of course the reality is they're not going to, most of them aren't going to get in anyway. So you wind up with filmmakers waiting an extra 8 months more than they need to, audiences waiting longer, and those festivals being, well, okay, well, I guess we'll show the films that are going to win Oscars or Spirits, this season. And it's, I think that the simplest solution would be if Sundance changed to November, which would also solve the COVID issue.
Yeah.
You know, and
Did I think I asked this
so
to you on Twitter, because I think I remember you even saying something like that. Do you think Slam Dance would move to coincide with a move?
yeah, no, we would in a heartbeat. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I mean, we like Sundance, and we would, follow them wherever they went, whether they want that or not. But and Sundance is a big enough player that they could do that, and Park City would love it if they did that, because it's, then that's 10 days of prime skiing time that, don't get used up by a bunch of filmmakers who don't ski. So it would be much better for the city if they were in the spring or the fall,
That never occurred to me, that the town as a tourist area may prefer them to not be there right then, because it's in the middle of their busiest season. I can kind of see that. That's like a bunch of filmmakers going to a film festival on the beach, but none of them want to go to the beach because the sun is hurtful.
Yeah. No, and which is common in a lot of, festivals try to hit their off season
Yeah.
of whatever the town is, whatever the town has going.
Well, I could also imagine you're going to get your locations cheaper, and you're going to, the businesses that are there are far more appreciative of the additional business. So you might be able to get a little bit more out of the community as well. No, it's great. Look, I'm not going to keep you too much longer. I'm just going to say thank you for your time. I mean, it's really, if anything, this was just my excuse to be able to catch up with a friend that I haven't talked to in a few years, because I've been,
Right on.
I disappeared for a few years. That part's on me. But you've kept busy, and thank you for filling me in on all the things that I've missed since COVID and all that, because it's been a ride. It's been a ride, and good luck on hopefully any announcements for the Spirit Awards. When does that come out? When do the nominations for Spirit Awards?
That's not for a couple months.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, the Gothams are kind of weirdly early in the award season.
Yeah.
And Spirits are kind of weirdly late. So I don't know. But there's also the SCL Awards, the Society of Composers and Lyricists.
Mm-hmm.
There's there's a lot of other kind of more specific things, and then you've got critics organizations, and look, the point is not to win. If you remember from my Oscar campaign, the goal wasn't to win an Oscar. The goal was to be part of the conversation,
right,
or part of the discourse, and I think that's really what people remember more than the awards themselves.
Yeah.
So.
And if anyone who is watching, and there are people watching, which I'm very happy about, if anyone is interested in a more in-depth conversation about 18 and a half, but also about the awards thing, Dan's Oscar campaign for one of his previous movies, we go into that actually pretty in depth. There's a video that I was able to recover from the lost archive of Film Snobbery. Over on our YouTube, and I think it might be on our website at this point too. If you check it out, Dan, I think you probably talk about that. I think we go on about that for about 20 minutes, that alone. So that was really good, and done at your house.
I know.
Yeah. So I want to thank you for coming on and kind of talking to me. I know that I decided to get in at the tail end really of your kind of podcast campaign. I hope that but we talked about something that you haven't talked about a million times already. But
yeah, no, I mean, it's no, we dropped a little bit of news in there for those listening at home. So there's some nuggets of joy in there that we talked about that I have not talked about with other people. So because you are my friend, Nick,
I appreciate that.
secrets. Yeah. So
Yes, that's just between you and I.
yeah. We'll
I want to
try
thank
to
you.
get our film booked in Salem, man.
You got it
Yeah,
booked in Salem?
we have not played in Massachusetts at all.
You're killing me. All right, so
I
yeah,
know. Tell me about it.
there's a good theater in Salem, although they're booked up right now with horror stuff. But there's a good one in Salem. There's another good one in Somerville, the Somerville Theater. Also, there is a single screener in Millbury, Massachusetts, which is not far from where I am. So that is like 20 minutes away, and that's really good. It's the Elm Street Draught House Cinema, and there is a Greek pastry cafe next door, and then across the street, the same people own it. There is a pizza place, which makes for a great after party.
You had me at Greek pastry.
Yes.
I'm
So,
all
and
about
they
that.
have a fantastic pastry case, and they make a good cappuccino and espresso. So, if you do make it out there, I have successfully slash unsuccessfully scheduled screenings there, and I'd be willing to give them another try. I think it was a miscommunication between the owner and myself. I don't think that anything malicious happened. I think something just got missed in between.
Weren't you going to buy a theater, or
I
was
was
that?
working on it. Yeah, it was so. The quick story of that was I was in Tennessee. I found a theater that it was an 8 screen multiplex that was empty, and they were going to give us about $500,000 for tenant improvement funds to fix up a lot of the interior issues because it had been gone for a while. It had sold, and or the lease, they allowed the lease to expire, and so everything left. We were going to use 6 of those theaters for actual theaters, and then we were going to reserve 2 for post-production offices and suites. And we are going to do a similar model to what I've done in the past, both successfully and unsuccessfully. You know more about that than some people, but good learning experience for me. Apologies in advance for everything else. So, but the great part is that now that I have I have a background from both sides of this kind of situation. I've run theaters, but I've also now run post offices. I've now also run other stuff, and obviously, if I have questions there, I have people I can call. It was going to be, I think it was going to be a really good way to balance front of house screenings and stuff that would take in money with the things that we're good at, but then also having this thing that we could sell kind of on the side that really would be paying the rent. You know what I mean? And especially because we had a good proximity to Atlanta, we had a good proximity to you still have the industry, the music videos in the music industry there that they still occasionally need just post. And if they're doing music videos, they need a place to screen them. And that's not just a 40 or 50 or 60-inch monitor. So we were looking to do that. The long and short of it is COVID happened. We had, like I said, we had $500,000 in tenant improvement funds from the actual the theater itself, and then we had about $375,000 for an actual investor that was interested in going in with us. And then COVID happened, and basically we just dropped everything. And so thankfully it didn't happen because I bet. Oh,
Nick, I should really take this American Airlines
you
call.
do. You know what? I'm gonna let Dan go. Thank you for being with us, Dan, and enjoy.
Hello.
Let's see here.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you. All right. I am ending this call. There we go. So I want to thank Dan Mirvish for coming on the show. I'm going to go ahead and kind of wrap up everything on our side here. I want to say thank you to Dan for coming on. Oh, I'm all messed up with my graphics. Here we go. Thank you for Dan for coming on. I want to say if you want to check out the archive of this episode, if you came in late, it's going to be up not too long, probably a day or so, or maybe later today, over at FilmSnobbery.com. You can also check us out on YouTube. If you search out Film Snobbery on YouTube, our videos will be there. You can also go and find us on Twitter, twitter.com/FilmSnobbery, Facebook.com/FilmSnobbery. Instagram.com/film_snobbery. And I want to just thank that Dan again, Dan Mirvish, the Dan Mirvish. And check out his movie 18 and a Half. You can also check out his previous movie, Bernard and Huey. You can check out his previous movie before that, Between Us. The man makes good movies. Also, check out his books, The Cheerful Subversive Guide to Independent Film. I think he has two, independent filmmaking and independent film marketing, I believe. And so I recommend checking those out if you like the conversation that we were having today and you want to continue it yourself. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions. And that's really about it for the week, folks. So we'll see you. Actually, we're doing this interesting thing this week. So in 2 days, we are going to be interviewing Grant Faulkner from NaNoWriMo. He's the executive director of NaNoWriMo in advance of November, the National Novel Writers Month. And we're going to be talking all things, writing, authors, screenwriting, distribution for that kind of stuff, and what NaNoWriMo is doing to be inclusive of the conversation for everyone there. So check us out. That's going to be on Thursday at 5 o'clock. I think it's going to be 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, which means 2 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. So check us out again. This is going to be right here where you're already watching us, hopefully at filmsnobbery.com/live. That's it for me. Thanks, folks. Have a good night.